The capital of Ptolemaic Egypt, Alexandria, was famous for many remarkable structures, including the famous lighthouse of Alexandria, which was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. The Pharos lighthouse illuminated the way for ships. The beacon of culture was the Alexandrian Library. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me and helps me keep writing new stories for you. Thank you for your support. A well-built, bearded Greek and a thin, dark-skinned boy walked through the streets of Eratosthenes, a suburb of Alexandria, also called the Old City. It was a mass of tangled, narrow streets, squeezed between leaning, untidy houses. In one of them, I served the master of the armorer's workshop, a bald-headed Egyptian named Petasur, until he decided to sell me to buy a strong Ethiopian. That's what I was called, Lykin, looked at this strange world with wide eyes. "Master," I called out to my new owner. The Greek walked on, paying no attention to me. It seemed that he saw and heard nothing at all, being completely absorbed in his own thoughts. Sometimes he would stop and draw some figure in the air with his finger, then continue walking again, somehow miraculously not bumping into people coming toward him. This was the strangest person I had ever seen in my short life. "Master," I repeated, and tugged at the edge of his cloak. The Greek stopped and looked at me so attentively, as if seeing me for the first time. "Never call me master," he said after a pause. "I don't like that word." "What do your slaves call you then?" I asked. "I have no slaves," the Greek replied, and added with a sly smile, "I, myself, am a slave. Yes, I am a slave of the library." He said this word, unknown to me, with such pride that I decided, this library must be a very noble lady, and perhaps even the wife of King Ptolemy. True, I had heard that Ptolemy's wife was called Berenice, but the Egyptian I served had 2 wives, an older one and a younger one, and the king might have 100 wives, and library is probably the youngest and most beloved. "And what did you want to ask me?" "I wanted to ask if your house is far, but if you yourself are a slave. Tell me, where does your lady live?" The Greek answered briefly and, as if forgetting about my existence, began muttering something under his breath. So I was right, I thought, pleased with my cleverness. She is a queen, and royal slaves live better than others. They are not burdened with work. They are not beaten with whatever comes to hand. Take, for example, this Greek. He's a slave, but he carries himself like a free man, and his cloak is strong and his sandals are not worn out. Meanwhile, we entered the new city, as the inhabitants of Eratosthenes called the district of Alexandria that bordered the sea and was inhabited by Greeks. The street was so wide that 2 horse-drawn carts could pass each other, and there was still room for pedestrians walking on both sides of the street. Languages from many countries could be heard: Greek, Hebrew, Egyptian, and what a variety of faces and clothing. Without leaving Alexandria, one could see all the peoples of the earth. The square in front of the palace was paved with smoothly polished stone. I ran barefoot across it, not afraid of hurting my feet, but only I was barefoot. Other people wore sandals with beautiful buckles or boots made of thin leather. They did not run, but walked, as it seemed to me, slowly and solemnly, as if afraid to disturb the peace of those who lived in this huge and beautiful house. It could have been called not a palace, but a temple, because the people who lived in it considered themselves not just rulers of Egypt, but also gods, similar to those who once ruled this country. The guard who protected the palace gates wore gilded armor, but the Greek entered the gates as if they were unguarded, and the guard nodded to him in a friendly manner. And here we were behind the wall that surrounded the royal cape from all sides, as this place was called. On the right stood a large building, on the left, a slightly smaller one. It was to this one that the Greek directed his steps. He pushed the doors, and we found ourselves in a huge hall surrounded by columns. I counted 9 tall columns of shining white stone, which I had heard was called marble. In front of each column stood a metal statue. For some reason, I decided that these were images of the mistress, and I bowed to them at the waist, Between the columns were tall doors, 8 in total, besides the ones we had entered through. In the middle of the hall stood a round table surrounded by chairs. Their backs were so high that the people sitting on them were almost invisible. However, one could see long sheets, similar to those that my old master used for keeping accounts. One of those sitting stuck his head out from behind the back of his chair and asked, "Who have you brought us?" "Eratosthenes." I understood that my companion was called Eratosthenes. "You need to know everything, Zoilus," the Greek replied to the stranger. "The boy is called Lykin. He will fight against dust." "Come, Lykin," said Eratosthenes, putting his hand on my shoulder. "I will explain your duties to you." We approached the doors between 2 columns and, passing through them, found ourselves in an elongated room, one wall of which was completely lined with cabinets. My old master also had a cabinet, always locked. I was not allowed to even come close to it, and in 3 years of service I never found out what was stored in it. But these cabinets were without doors and resembled giant honeycombs. From each cell protruded some object that resembled a quiver. "Have you ever climbed trees?" the Greek suddenly asked. I froze in surprise. I had never seen trees that could be climbed. "Wait," said Eratosthenes embarrassedly. "I keep forgetting that I live in Egypt. Where would there be big trees here? However, could you climb up this cabinet?" I looked over the cabinet with my eyes. The openings for the quivers were like the rungs of a ladder. "That's good. Your task is to wipe the cabinet and cases with a damp cloth. You'll start from the bottom with the alpha cabinet. Then you'll move on to the beta cabinet. Then to the 3rd cabinet. It's called gamma. Then you'll move on to delta and epsilon, zeta and eta. And remember," he added after a pause, "the cases must be kept closed and put back in their place. The library demands order." He again pronounced the lady's name with such respect that I decided to do everything as the Greek had said. Probably, Library is a stern woman and values these quivers, or cases, as the Greek calls them, very much. "Here's water and a cloth for you. Get to work," said Eratosthenes, "and I have other matters." And he ran out of the room with agility surprising for such a well-built body. Left alone, I cast a glance at the cabinets entrusted to me and repeated aloud their strange names. Alpha, Beta, Gamma. True, the word Delta was familiar to me. It meant triangle and was used to denote the lower course of the Nile, which had the shape of a triangle. But why is a square cabinet called Delta? I could not understand this. Wetting the cloth in water, I carefully wrung it out and set about cleaning, or fighting dust, as Eratosthenes had put it. There was indeed a lot of dust. In some places it lay in a solid layer. In others there were imprints of fingers and palms on it. From time to time, slaves of the library appeared behind me. They were all bearded Greeks. Going around me, they approached this or that cabinet, took a quiver, and silently went away. The one whom Eratosthenes had called Zoilus also came, blocking the way. He told me and pinched me painfully. I quickly cleared the way for the angry slave, and when he passed, I saw that he had a hump on his back. The hunchback went to the Omicron cabinet and pulled out a quiver from it. During the day he came many more times, always to this cabinet. Yes, this was a strange house where strange people lived. They were engaged in business incomprehensible to me. Therefore, I decided that the lady was also an unusual woman. Probably. She is very rich if she owns this whole house with a large number of slaves, I thought. Falling asleep, a few days passed, and I myself laughed at my naivety. I understood that library was not a lady, but a place for storing books, because the quivers contained scrolls with works by authors. I learned that the sculptors in front of the marble columns depicted patronesses of sciences and arts, whom the Greeks call muses, hence the name of this palace, Museum. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me and helps me keep writing new stories for you. Thank you for your support. Besides the hall for studies and the library, it had rooms for rest and a dining room. The people whom I had initially considered slaves of the library turned out to be learned men, invited to Alexandria from various countries of the Greek world. They were all maintained by King Ptolemy, who considered himself a patron of sciences. In a word, Eratosthenes had been joking then, because serious people also understand jokes. Or maybe it wasn't a joke at all, because the Greek devoted all his life to the library and worked in it tirelessly, like the most diligent slave, and he really didn't like the word master, and indeed had no slaves himself. As for the names of the cabinets, they turned out to be Greek letters. In the Alpha cabinet were works by those writers and scholars whose names began with the first letter of the alphabet, and indeed the word alphabet itself comes from the combination of the first two letters, alpha and beta. I quickly learned to distinguish the letters of the alphabet, and with Eratosthenes' help, to read as well. In my free time from work, I would take out scrolls by those writers whom Eratosthenes called the best. My conversation partners became Aesop, Herodotus, Aeschylus, and dozens of other mocking and serious Greeks. It was wonderful that they all had their own voices. These voices sounded within me, and it was impossible to confuse them. Without leaving the library, I saw the Scythian steppes and the forests of India, visited Athens and Babylon, Syracuse and Carthage, and even those cities that no longer existed. Once I went to Rhodotus to see old friends. They bombarded me with questions about how I was living, whether the Greeks were offending me. I briefly told them about my life, but it seemed they didn't understand me, and I added, "They don't beat me. Only once did someone raise a hand against me." "You see," said an old Egyptian, "Greeks remain Greeks. It's long been time to set their palace on fire and smoke them all out with fire." I stepped back, my eyes blazed with anger, and I said, emphasizing each word, "Don't dare speak like that. The library is there." The words burst out of me with such force that I myself was frightened, but I could not have acted otherwise. Someone had insulted the most precious thing in my life. "What kind of library?" asked the Egyptian in surprise. "The one where all the wisdom of the world is gathered," I replied. Another asked mockingly, "You're just a slave." "Yes, I'm a slave," I said proudly. "A slave of the library." When I returned to the museum, Eratosthenes looked at me attentively. "You've changed, Lykin," he said, "and it's good. The library changes everyone who truly serves it." I didn't fully understand his words then, but I felt that something important was happening to me. The scrolls I read daily were not just collections of words. They were living voices of people who had thought, suffered, rejoiced, and sought truth centuries before my birth. One day, while cleaning the Theta cabinet, I accidentally knocked over a scroll. As I was putting it back, my eyes fell on the first lines. It was a poem by a poet whose name I couldn't read well yet, but the words captivated me. "The mind that has once learned to doubt will never again believe blindly." I stood for a long time, holding the scroll in my hands. These words seemed to be addressed directly to me. I had indeed learned to doubt the simple explanations that had satisfied me before. "Have you found something interesting?" Eratosthenes' voice sounded behind me. I turned around, embarrassed at being caught reading during working hours. "I'm sorry. I accidentally—" "Don't apologize," he interrupted. "What did you read?" Eratosthenes smiled. "Ah, Xenophanes. A wise man. He taught that we should question everything, even the gods. Do you understand what he means?" "I think he means that we shouldn't accept anything just because someone told us so." "Exactly." Eratosthenes' eyes lit up. "You're beginning to think like a true philosopher, Lykin." From that day on, my relationship with Eratosthenes changed. In the evenings, when the library was quiet, he would often call me and explain the meaning of difficult passages, tell me about the authors, their lives and thoughts. "The library is not just a collection of scrolls," he said one day. "It's a place where human thought lives and grows. Every scroll here is a conversation with a great mind, and you, Lykin, are becoming part of this great conversation." I was cleaning the Kappa cabinet when a new face appeared in the library. It was a young man, about 20 years old, with intelligent eyes and an eager expression. He approached Eratosthenes with obvious reverence. "Master," he said, "I have come to study mathematics and astronomy." Eratosthenes greeted the newcomer kindly and began showing him around the library. As they passed by me, I heard Apollodorus ask, "Who is this boy? Is he your student?" "No," replied Eratosthenes. "He is much more than that. He is a true servant of knowledge." These words filled me with pride. I was no longer just a cleaner of dusty cabinets. I was a guardian of the greatest treasure humanity possessed. Knowledge itself. Days flowed into weeks. Weeks into months. My reading skills improved, and I could now read not only Greek but also understand some Latin and even a little Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, which Eratosthenes taught me in his spare time. "Why do you spend so much time with me?" Eratosthenes was silent for a moment, looking out at the harbor where ships from all over the Mediterranean moored. "Because I see in you what I once was," he said finally. "A hungry mind, eager for knowledge. The library needs such people. Lykin, not just scholars from noble families, but anyone who truly loves wisdom. But I'm just a slave." "Oh, are you?" he asked with a smile. "Who owns your mind, Lykin? Who controls your thoughts?" I thought about this question for a long time. Indeed, no one could own my thoughts. In my mind, I was free to travel to any country, to talk with any philosopher, to explore any idea. "I understand," I said quietly. "In the most important sense, I am free." "Now you truly understand what it means to be a slave of the library," said Eratosthenes. "We serve not a master, but truth itself." That night, as I lay on my simple bed in the servants' quarters, I thought about my life. Just months ago, I had been an ignorant boy, serving in a weapons workshop, knowing nothing beyond the narrow streets of Eratosthenes. Now, the entire world of human knowledge was opening before me. I thought about the scrolls I had read, epic poems that told of heroes and gods, historical works that described the rise and fall of great civilizations, philosophical treatises that explored the deepest questions of existence. Each scroll was a doorway to a new world, and I had the key to all of them. As sleep came over me, I made a promise to myself. I would dedicate my life to learning, to understanding, to serving the great cause of knowledge. I would be worthy of the trust that Eratosthenes and the library had placed in me. Little did I know that this promise would soon be tested in ways I could never have imagined. The Lady Library. The test came sooner than I expected. It was a hot summer day when I first heard whispers of trouble in the streets of Alexandria. Political tensions were rising between the native Egyptians and the Greek rulers. Some spoke of rebellion, others of harsh measures from the palace. I was working in the library, carefully cleaning the scrolls of the Mu cabinet, when Zoilus approached me. His usual sneer was replaced by something that looked almost like concern. "Boy," he said quietly, "there are rumors in the city. They say the Egyptians are planning to attack the palace quarter. If that happens, you should know. You're one of us now. You serve the library." I nodded, not fully understanding what he meant, but as the days passed, the atmosphere in Alexandria grew more tense. Ships in the harbor flew flags of distress. Merchants closed their shops early, and groups of angry men gathered in the squares of Eratosthenes. One evening, as I was walking back to the Museon from an errand in the city, I was stopped by a group of young Egyptians. I recognized one of them, Keti, who had worked alongside me in Ptosir's workshop. "Lykin," he called out, "we've been looking for you. Tomorrow night, we strike against the Greek oppressors. We're going to burn down their precious palace and drive them into the sea. That includes your library," added another with a cruel smile. "All those scrolls will make excellent kindling." My blood ran cold. The library, with all its irreplaceable scrolls, its centuries of accumulated wisdom, its voice of human knowledge, destroyed forever? The thought was unbearable. "You can't do that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The library belongs to all humanity, not just to the Greeks." "Listen to him," laughed Keti. The slave boy has become more Greek than the Greeks themselves. I am not Greek, I replied firmly. I am Egyptian, like you, but I am also something more. I am a servant of knowledge, and knowledge has no nationality. Pretty words, sneered the leader of the group. But when the fire burns, your precious knowledge will turn to ash, just like everything else. They left me standing there, shaken to my core. I had to warn the library, had to protect it somehow. But how could one young slave stand against an entire rebellion? I ran back to the Museon as fast as my legs could carry me. I found Eratosthenes in his study, working by lamplight on calculations that covered several scrolls. Master, I gasped, forgetting his dislike of the title in my urgency. There will be an attack tomorrow night. They plan to burn the library. Eratosthenes looked up from his work, his face grave. I know, he said quietly. We have received warnings from the palace. King Ptolemy's guards are preparing defenses. What about the library? Some scrolls will be moved to safety, he replied. But most will have to remain here and trust in the gods. There must be something more we can do, I insisted. Eratosthenes stood up and placed his hands on my shoulders. Lykin, do you remember what I taught you about the nature of knowledge? That it exists not just in scrolls, but in the minds of people, I recited. Exactly. The true library is not this building. These cabinets, these scrolls, the true library is here. He tapped his temple. And here, and in the minds of all who have learned from these texts. I mean that even if they burn every scroll, the knowledge lives on in us. We are the library, Lykin. We are its guardians and its future. That night, I could not sleep. I wandered through the halls of the Museon, looking at the familiar cabinets, touching the scrolls I had come to know so well. Each one represented years or decades of human thought and creativity. How could they be destroyed in a single night of madness? As dawn approached, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I would not simply stand by and watch. If knowledge was truly immortal, as Eratosthenes taught, then it was up to those who loved it to ensure its survival. I began to systematically visit each cabinet, not to clean, but to memorize. I had discovered over the months that I possessed an unusual gift. I could remember entire passages after reading them just a few times. Now I put this ability to use as never before. I memorized the opening lines of the Iliad, the logical arguments of Aristotle, the geographical observations of Herodotus, the mathematical principles of Euclid. Hour after hour, I committed to memory as much as I could hold. Other scholars, noticing my activity, began to understand what I was doing. Some joined me, reciting important passages aloud to fix them in their memories. The library, usually so quiet and contemplative, became filled with the sound of voices preserving knowledge through the oldest method of all, human memory. When evening came, we could see the glow of torches gathering in Rakotis. The sound of angry voices carried on the night air. The rebellion had begun. Ptolemy's guards took their positions around the palace quarter. The scholars gathered in the main hall of the Museon, some clutching their most precious scrolls, others empty-handed but with minds full of memorized wisdom. Whatever happens tonight, Eratosthenes addressed us. Remember this. We are the inheritors of centuries of human thought. We carry within us the voices of poets and philosophers, mathematicians and historians. As long as we live, as long as we remember, they are not forgotten. We could hear the clash of weapons, the shouts of fighting men, the crackling of flames from the direction of the palace, but the Museon itself was spared. Perhaps the rebels recognized its value, or perhaps the guards were more effective than we had hoped. By morning, the rebellion was over. Many had died. As I walked through its halls in the dawn light, I realized that I was no longer the same person who had entered these doors months before as an ignorant slave boy. I had become something new, a living library, a human repository of knowledge. The scrolls around me were precious, but no more precious than the wisdom I now carried in my mind and heart. "You did well last night," Eratosthenes said, finding me standing before the Alpha cabinet where it all began. "I did what I had to do," I replied. "What the library required of me. And now? What will you do now?" I looked around at the familiar cabinets, the scholars returning to their work, the morning sun streaming through the windows onto the marble floor. "Now I continue to serve," I said, "because I understand finally what you meant when you called yourself a slave of the library. It's not slavery. It's the highest form of freedom, the freedom to serve something greater than yourself." Eratosthenes smiled, the same proud smile he had given me that first day when I proved I could climb the cabinet. "Yes, Lykin," he said. "Now you truly understand. Welcome to the eternal library, the one that can never be destroyed, because it lives within us." And so I continued my service, no longer as a mere cleaner of dusty scroll, but as a guardian of human knowledge itself. The library had made me free, and in my freedom, I chose to serve it forever. The Lady Library. Part 4. Years passed, like pages turning in an ancient manuscript. I grew from a boy into a young man, and my understanding of the library's true nature deepened with each passing season. The rebellion had been just one of many trials that tested our dedication to preserving knowledge. Under Eratosthenes' guidance, I learned not only to read and memorize, but to think critically about what I learned. I began to understand the connections between different fields of knowledge, how mathematics related to astronomy, how history informed philosophy, how poetry captured truths that mere facts could not express. One autumn morning, Eratosthenes called me to his study. He had aged visibly in recent years, and I could see the weight of his responsibilities in the lines around his eyes. "Lykin," he said, "I have something important to discuss with you. King Ptolemy has been impressed by reports of your dedication and abilities. He has offered to grant you your freedom and sponsor your education as a full scholar of the Museion." Freedom, the dream of every slave, was being offered to me. But strangely, I felt not joy, but confusion. "What would that mean?" I asked finally. Eratosthenes replied, "You would have the status and privileges of a free scholar. You could pursue any area of study that interests you. You could even leave Alexandria if you wished, to study in Athens or Rhodes or anywhere in the Greek world. And if I refuse?" Eratosthenes looked surprised. "Why would you refuse? This is what every educated slave dreams of." I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the harbor, where ships from distant lands brought new scrolls and new ideas to our library. "Because," I said slowly, working out my thoughts as I spoke, "I have learned that true freedom is not about legal status or social recognition. It's about choosing what to serve, and I have already chosen. You would remain a slave by choice. I would remain what I have always been, a servant of knowledge. Whether I am legally free or bound makes no difference to my true calling." Eratosthenes was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, and I saw in his eyes the same pride he had shown when I first climbed the cabinet to clean the scrolls. "You have learned the deepest lesson the library can teach," he said. "That wisdom lies not in what we possess, but in what possesses us." I remained in my humble position, but my role in the library continued to evolve. Younger scholars began to seek me out, not for my official credentials, for I had none, but for my deep knowledge of the collection and my ability to find connections between seemingly unrelated texts. I became a bridge between the formal scholars and the living wisdom of the library itself. When a young mathematician needed to understand the historical context of Euclid's work, he came to me. When a philosopher wanted to trace the development of an idea through multiple authors, she sought my help. When Apollodorus, now an accomplished astronomer, needed to find ancient observations of celestial phenomena, I could guide him to exactly the right scrolls. One day, a new scholar arrived from Athens, a young woman named Hypatia, whose reputation as a mathematician had already reached Alexandria. Unlike many of the male scholars, she did not dismiss me as merely a servant. but recognized immediately that I possessed knowledge that could not be found in any single scroll. "You are the library's memory," she said during our first conversation. "You hold in your mind not just the contents of these scrolls, but their relationships to each other, their place in the great conversation of human thought." "I try to serve that conversation," I replied modestly. She said firmly, "You are part of that conversation. Your insights, your connections, your understanding. These add to the sum of human knowledge just as surely as any formal treatise." Her words gave me a new perspective on my role. I began to see that my years of humble service had given me something unique, a comprehensive view of human knowledge that no specialist, however brilliant, could possess. I started writing down my observations and insights, not in the formal style of academic treatises, but as personal reflections on the patterns I saw emerging from the vast collection of human thought. I wrote about the recurring themes that appeared in different cultures and centuries, about the questions that every generation seemed compelled to ask, about the evolution of ideas across time and space. These writings began to circulate among the scholars, copied and shared informally. I was amazed to discover that others found value in my simple observations, that my perspective as a servant of the library had given me insights that were unavailable to those who approached knowledge from positions of power and privilege. One evening, as I was working late in the library, I encountered Zoilus, the hunchback scholar who had once pinched me for blocking his way. He was now very old, his face lined with years of study. "You know, boy," he said, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "For thinking you were just a slave. I see now that you understood the library's true nature long before the rest of us did. You saw that it wasn't about status or credentials or formal learning. It was about service to something greater than ourselves." I was moved by his words, but also saddened. "It took me years to understand that," I said, "and I'm still learning." "That's the mark of a true scholar," he replied with a smile. "The moment you think you have learned everything, you have learned nothing." As I grew older, I took on more responsibility for training new servants and junior scholars in the ways of the library. I taught them not just the practical skills of handling scrolls and organizing knowledge, but the deeper principles that Eratosthenes had taught me. That knowledge belongs to all humanity, that wisdom is found in questions as much as answers. Greatest learning comes from humble service to truth. My students came to call me the Living Catalog, a title that would have embarrassed me in my youth, but which I now bore with pride. I was indeed a catalog, but a living one, capable of making connections and drawing insights that no written index could provide. One spring day, word came that Eratosthenes had died in his sleep. The great scholar who had taken a confused slave boy and shown him the wonders of human knowledge was gone. I felt as if the library itself had lost its voice. But as I stood in the great hall, looking at the cabinets I had first cleaned so many years ago, I realized that Eratosthenes' greatest gift to me was not knowledge itself, but the understanding of how to serve it. The library would continue through wars and rebellions, through the rise and fall of kingdoms, through all the changes that time would bring, and as long as there were people willing to dedicate their lives to preserving and transmitting human knowledge, the conversation that began in this place would never end. I was no longer the frightened slave boy who had once mistaken the library for a woman. I was now its guardian, its memory, its living voice, and in serving it, I had found the deepest freedom possible. The freedom that comes from dedicating one's life to something eternal and infinitely valuable. The scrolls around me contained the thoughts of thousands of great minds, but I had learned the most important truth from my own experience, that knowledge is not something we possess, but something that possesses us. And when we surrender to that possession, we become part of something far greater than ourselves, the endless human quest for understanding and truth. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me and helps me keep writing new stories for you. Thank you for your support. In the final years of my life, as my hair turned white and my hands grew less steady, I often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me from the narrow streets of Eratosthenes to the heart of the greatest library the world had ever known. New generations of scholars came and went. Some remembered Eratosthenes from their studies. but to most he was just a name attached to certain mathematical principles. Few knew the man who had taken a slave boy and transformed him into a guardian of knowledge. But the library endured, as it always had. New scrolls arrived from distant lands, new ideas challenged old assumptions, and the great conversation of human thought continued to evolve and grow. I had trained dozens of successors over the years, passing on not just the practical knowledge of organizing and preserving scrolls, but the deeper understanding of what it meant to serve something greater than oneself. Some were slaves like I had been. Others were freeborn scholars, but all shared the same hunger for knowledge and the same dedication to its preservation. One of my finest students was a young Egyptian woman named Merit, who had been born free but chose to work in the library because of her love for ancient texts. She had learned to read hieroglyphics, Demotic Egyptian, Greek, and Latin, making her invaluable for preserving the native Egyptian wisdom that was increasingly being forgotten as Greek culture dominated Alexandria. "Master Lykin," she said to me one day, I had long ago given up protesting the title, "I have been thinking about something you taught me, that knowledge has no nationality. But isn't there something valuable in preserving the distinct wisdom of each culture?" It was exactly the kind of question that had made me proud to be her teacher. "What do you think?" I asked, in the Socratic manner that Eratosthenes had taught me. "I think," she said carefully, "that knowledge is like a great river, fed by many streams. Each culture contributes its own waters, but they all flow together toward the same destination, understanding. And what is that destination?" "Truth," she replied without hesitation. "Not partial truth, not the truth as seen from one perspective, but the fullest truth that human minds can grasp when they work together across all boundaries." I smiled, feeling the satisfaction that comes from seeing a student surpass their teacher. "Then you understand why the library must welcome scrolls in every language, ideas from every nation, wisdom from every tradition." As my strength began to fail, I spent more and more time simply sitting among the cabinets, feeling the presence of all the great minds whose thoughts surrounded me. Sometimes I would imagine conversations with authors long dead, discussing their ideas as if they were sitting beside me. I talked with Homer about the nature of heroism, with Herodotus about the rise and fall of civilizations, with Euclid about the beauty of mathematical truth. In my mind, they were all still alive, their voices as clear and distinct as they had been when I first learned to hear them in the words on the scrolls. One particularly quiet afternoon, as the sun slanted through the windows of the library, casting long shadows between the columns, I made a decision that I had been contemplating for months. It was time to write down my own story, not as a formal treatise, but as a testament to the transformative power of knowledge. I wanted future generations to understand that the library's greatest treasure was not any single scroll or collection of scrolls, but the spirit of inquiry and dedication that animated all who truly served it. I wanted them to know that wisdom could come from the humblest origins, that a slave could become a philosopher, that service could be the highest form of freedom. I wrote slowly, carefully, trying to capture not just the events of my life, but their deeper meaning. I wrote about the boy who had mistaken the library for a woman, about the revelation of understanding what the library truly was, about the gradual awakening of my mind to the wonders of human thought. Most importantly, I wrote about the lesson that had taken me years to fully understand, that knowledge is not something we possess, but something that possesses us, and that when we surrender to that possession, we become part of the eternal human quest for truth. When I had finished writing, I called Merit to me and handed her the scroll. "This is my gift to the library," I told her. "Not my greatest contribution, perhaps, but my most personal one." She unrolled the scroll and began to read. As she read, I saw tears form in her eyes. "Master," she said, "this is beautiful, but it's also incomplete. The story isn't finished. You're still here, still teaching, still serving the library. The story continues as long as you do." I looked around the great hall one more time, at the cabinets I had cleaned as a boy, at the scrolls I had read and reread countless times, at the scholars bent over their work just as I had seen them do for decades. "You're right," I said. "The story never really ends. It just passes from one generation to the next. Each person who dedicates their life to knowledge becomes part of the same eternal story." That evening, as I prepared for sleep, I thought about all the lives that had been touched by the library, scholars who had gone on to establish schools in other cities, carrying with them the principles they had learned in Alexandria, students who had returned to their home countries with new ideas that would change the way people thought about the world, even humble servants like myself, who had found in the library a purpose and meaning that transformed their entire existence. The physical building might someday crumble, the scrolls might be lost to fire or war or simple decay, but the spirit of inquiry, the love of wisdom, the dedication to truth, these were immortal. They would survive in the minds and hearts of all who had been touched by the library's magic. I closed my eyes and felt myself surrounded not by stone walls and wooden cabinets, but by the invisible presence of all human knowledge, past, present, and yet to come. I was no longer just Lykin, the slave boy from Eratosthenes. I was part of something infinite and eternal, a single voice in the great choir of human thought that had been singing since the first person looked up at the stars and wondered about their nature. In serving the library, I had found my place in that choir, and though my individual voice would someday be stilled, the song itself would continue forever, carried forward by new voices, new minds, new seekers after truth. This was my legacy, our legacy. Not any particular discovery or achievement, but participation in the endless human quest to understand ourselves and our world. We were all servants of that quest, all slaves to that magnificent obsession with knowledge and truth. And in that service, we had found the deepest freedom of all, the freedom to be part of something far greater than our individual selves, something that would outlast empires and civilizations, and perhaps even humanity itself. The Lady Library had indeed been a great mistress to serve. She had demanded everything of us, our time, our energy, our devotion, our lives, but in return, she had given us something beyond price. The knowledge that our lives had meaning, that our work had value, that we were part of the greatest adventure in human history. The adventure of learning and understanding. As sleep took me that night, I whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever gods might be listening, thanking them for the privilege of having served in the greatest library the world had ever known, and for having learned the true meaning of freedom through a lifetime of willing servitude to knowledge and truth. Merit found me the next morning, peaceful in my sleep, with a slight smile on my face. She said later that I looked like a man who had completed a great work and was satisfied with what he had accomplished. They buried me in the scholars' cemetery outside Alexandria, with a simple stone that bore only my name and the inscription, "Servant of the Library." It was all I had ever wanted to be, and all I would ever need to be remembered as, but Merit was right. It continued in our work, and in the work of all who came after, each adding their own voice to the great conversation, each serving in their own way, the eternal human quest for knowledge and understanding. The library lived on, and in it, we all lived on, forever part of the magnificent tapestry of human thought and wisdom that no fire could burn, no tyrant could destroy, no passage of time could diminish. We had served the Lady Library, and she had made us immortal.